Amelia Earhart, Leonardo da Vinci, Bill Gates. These people are learners, autodidacts, Renaissance men and women. Welcome to the Robin Zander Show, where we meet with ordinary people who have learned to live extraordinary lives.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Robin Zander Show, where we meet with people from across disciplines to understand how they've trained themselves in the art and science of learning. I'm thrilled to share an interview with an incredible woman and my close friend, Vivienne Ming. Vivienne was named one of the top 10 women to watch in tech by Inc. magazine, and she speaks around the world on topics of gender in technology, principles of new management, and how to maximize human potential. Vivienne is a visiting scholar at the UC Berkeley Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, pursuing research in neuro-prosthetics. In her free time, she explores things like augmented cognition using the Google Glass, and has developed a predictive model of diabetes to better manage blood sugar levels of her diabetic son. Vivienne and I talk at length about public speaking, something that she has been doing for decades and which has become an even bigger part of her career more recently. We discuss how she uses audiences' reactions to what she's saying to learn more deeply about the subjects that she is presenting on. And this is from everything from talks to parents about what to do right now to help their children, to presentations in front of bankers in South Africa on what commerce will look like in the year 2040. Vivienne and I talk very candidly about her gender transition. She was born with the name Evan and spent many years profoundly unhappy and depressed. But even before that moment in her life, when she decided to live, in her words, a life of substance, we discuss how she has used that initial decision to continue to train herself to be someone different than she was previously, how she used that experience to reshape herself anew. We all have moments in our lives that are memorable, even pivotal, and there are aspects in the stories that Vivienne relates about herself that we can all learn from and use to continue to improve ourselves. Finally, we cover Vivienne's work of maximizing human potential, how she is constantly refining herself, and how her company Socos has created a product, Muse, which is a service that delivers daily recommendations to parents to support their children. The interview starts off with a very deep dive into how Vivienne uses her keynotes to refine her own ideas. So even if you're not interested in public speaking, give that section a chance, because there's a lot there about learning more generally. Then we discuss her gender transition, her inflection points throughout her life, and what she's most excited about today. I hope you enjoy this conversation with neuroscientist, technologist, and serial entrepreneur, Vivienne Ming. So many places we could start. You've often commented on not using chronology as a description of a person and their mission. So maybe one of the things that first drew me to you and to your work is the mission statement of maximizing human potential. When did that first become real to you?
That's an interesting question, and one that I've come back to a lot as I've sort of worked on the speaking quite a bit. You're going to ask that question, and then I'm going to detour into something completely different, eventually to come back and answer it, which is to say, when I was a graduate student, I told my fellow students that they should talk all the time. By that I mean give formal talks all the time. The way I put it is people should be beating you off with a stick. I don't care if it's the same audience with the same material. Every day, every night, if there's a stage and you're not on it, you're missing an opportunity. The main reason isn't to get your banter down or to build your stage presence. I mean, those are nice side benefits if you actually think you're going to spend a meaningful amount of time in your career talking, which seemingly to the great surprise of the general public is actually a good chunk of what scientists do. And in fact, pretty good predictor of whether someone will have a prolific science career is how good of a communicator they are.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Communicator. Sure.
Yeah, but a lot of that there's a reason why
communicating to the public.
We think that some of the public profile and the podium work, if you will, of public intellectuals comes because they're so smart and so. But in fact, it's a very interlinked thing that they come to prominence because people can understand what they're saying.
Right.
Part of why they can understand what they're saying isn't simply that they're very, very smart or that they sat down and worked out the greatest talk. It's because they have practiced communicating it. And what practicing communicating means isn't hitting all of your marks on stage or making certain your timing's just right. It is expressing yourself and then getting the feedback of whether people actually understood what you were talking about.
So I want you to keep going there, but quickly, what are some things that you do, maybe day to day or week to week or month to month, with all of the public speaking you've been doing and are planning going forward, to practice, to hone the skill of communicating?
One thing I do that, again, may seem strange, but if you think of, and I haven't actually totally finished the idea, but if you think of communication as fundamentally two-way, then to some degree, you should never say the same thing twice. So I nominally give the same talk often the night after I just gave it.
Right.
And maybe even to a similar audience. And yet they don't get the same talk. And I don't mean in subtle ways. I mean, like, often accidentally, I'll think after that second talk, oh, I forgot about that one thing, and I got sidetracked because part of it is just my approach to speaking. I prefer to be a little extemporaneous, but part of it is also because I'm in the midst of a conversation. I'm intentionally trying different things. Did this phrasing work? Did this idea work? Wow, the audience just said ooh and ah. I had just had that email exchange to you about Ryan Holiday's comment about wearing the same clothing on stage that he happened to have been wearing in one of the slides, which he commented on, then everyone in the audience laughed. I've had that exact same experience myself and worked it into future talks. Because the point is that it's fundamentally about exploring your own understanding of the ideas. That's why people should be beating you off with a stick. Not because you're an egotist that wants to get up in front of people. It's because that is your stage to truly explore your own ideas, which, guess what? You don't understand any better than anybody else does. So you're going to get up there collaboratively with everyone in that audience and figure out what the hell you mean. Because if you think you know, that's actually your first step to really falling flat.
So when you describe that, it sounds like a lot of work, much more than just memorizing a script and presenting that script on stage to a new audience.
Boy, maybe it seems that way. And maybe it seems that way if the idea of getting up in front of a stage in and of itself is daunting or feels like a lot of work. For me, and for those unlucky people that are in my company on a regular basis, I've got a lot to say. And so, just simply having something to spit out in front of people, I've literally given extemporaneous 4-hour talks. So, that end of it is not challenging to me. This says nothing about what it might be for someone else. And I don't care whether my talk comes off as perfectly polished and I'm hitting my marks, my timing. By the way, clearly a 4-hour talk is vastly different than a filmed, 10-minute, bam, this is my life. And I've done those also. But nowadays, all I really do is just kind of run through it in my head ahead of time. And I don't even mean like, all right, set to watch, I've got 45 minutes, I'm going to go. No, I just mean literally as I'm flying somewhere and I'm wiped out because I didn't get enough sleep the night beforehand, my head's down on the tray table, in my mind, I'm just thinking, well, maybe I could phrase it this way, maybe I could phrase it that way. If I if I set up this point, then it would lead better into the other. I'm thinking how I will change up ideas I've expressed before, how will I incorporate new research, new events, and to the degree that I am a deeply amateur wannabe comedian, work in new humor into my set. For me, it's all about deeply understanding what it is I want to express. So that's both about the experience up on stage, but it's also beforehand. Like, when I don't want to get up on stage and give a rote presentation, however well acted it may be. I know this stuff. So if we're going to explore it together, then I can't give you a stage performance. And I actually would find that, and do typically find that, much more challenging. Tell me I've got 5 minutes. One thing I can guarantee you is whoever comes next should just go grab a cup of coffee, because it isn't going to be 5 minutes. But it's still, I find that actually a lot more daunting. It's the classic. It's harder to edit than it is
to be concise.
Yeah. So, but it's not just, for me, it isn't just about being concise, but it's honestly, wait, what am I getting out of this? So I understand in 5 minutes I'm going to give you this pat talk, and I'm going to communicate something to you of value. What am I getting back? Am I going to get something in 5 minutes? I actually hope it's a little bit confusing, that there are some questions, because I want people then to walk up and ask me about it, because that's where I'm going to get something back.
Is this a learned skill? Right. So you were teaching fellow graduate students that they should be communicating more.
No, I was pompously berating fellow graduate students for not doing it. I think a descriptor which they would happily agree with.
Okay.
But I still say exactly the same thing to audiences and mentees and interns today. Just there should never be an empty stage. Never, ever. In some ways it's very hard for me to say. As we have not discussed, but anyone who knows me knows I have an unusual background. There was another life, quite literally, where I had a lot of stage fright. I wouldn't have liked to have gotten up on stage at all. My father used to tell this story that he really loved about how in some elementary school Christmas pageant, I was the tree, because the teacher told him that I just couldn't remember any of the lines. And then on the drive home from the performance, I recited all of the lines for the entire performance. Of course, I don't remember any of this, and you always have to take your parents with a grain of salt when they say things like this. But nonetheless, I'm not doing it as a form of performance, and I probably still feel awkward about a situation like that.
So what's then the difference between a stage performance where you have a script, where you're scared of being the tree, and the creative collaboration that you now do on stage?
That's a good question. To some degree, for me, it would be the idea that, and it's something I really had to get away from earlier in my life. It was a huge problem. I used to describe myself as a destructive perfectionist, which is to say nothing was good enough. Nothing, ever.
Right.
Even when I started to get my life kind of back together and went back to school and so forth and got perfect scores in classes, I would be profoundly, to say disappointed is like profound, just depressed, because I hadn't done more. And leaving behind that previous life and identity, part of that was trying to leave as much of that behind as I can. Clearly, anyone like you that spends time with me knows that there's a little, some of that under the cover. You can judge for yourself the degree to which it's still present. But so for me, a performance would be, I'm going to get up there and this is it. I have created something. This is the best I can give you. It is, I'm not saying that a performance doesn't feed off of the audience and so forth, but for me, it would be a final statement about something. Which is probably maybe the wrong way to think about it, but nonetheless, how I in my amygdala think about it. That's a fear reference for the non-neuroscientists in the audience. So whereas when I go up and give a talk, even in front of thousands and thousands of people, even whether it's deeply technical or very intentionally entertaining, I am doing it as this collaborative exploration. I'm very confident in my ability to do that. The imperfections are totally allowable because I'm not giving a performance, because I am genuinely exploring a set of ideas with an audience. And, I've even gotten in the habit of doing things like giving my talks somewhat obscure names and then challenging the audience to guess their meanings as we go along. Not because I don't want them to fall asleep. If you've ever taught a college class, some of your audience will fall asleep no matter what you do. But because I actually want them probing me in moments and giving me feedback. So when someone shouts out, "That's about taxes," then because that's a reference to one of my titles, then I know, wow, that's where it became clear to the audience how this obscure concept, in this case taxes, relates to, say, bias and discrimination, where they suddenly had an aha moment. So I intentionally engineer those into the talk so I get those moments of feedback. When do people laugh? When do they ah and ooh? And how can I use those, because I'm a scientist and a geek, to actually collect data in real time about the ideas that I'm trying to explore?
So the way I hear you describing that, it's like you're always teaching. You're always studying and exploring what works, but then I'm
always teaching me.
Okay.
And I don't say that as wishy-washy philosophical nonsense. I mean, very genuinely. Listen, I come with a lot of ego, but I also come with a massive amount of uncertainty. And I never think I've got it figured out. And so I'm thrilled when I have 1,000 people to help me figure something out. Over time, I have been able to build a persona or a comfort level or something around the idea that actually this has some value outside of me. It took a long time to get there. It was, again, when people think of me and perhaps think of gender transition, no. This was about the transition of an entire person. And this included, social interaction and confidence, and it included worldview and all sorts of things that I thought, hell, if I'm going to do one, let's try and fix them all, because I got a lot of stuff that's not working.
So we've never touched on sort of your transition and who you were before and how you changed yourself. Who were you? What have you changed?
Who was I? It's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me, who was I before? I suppose that the public consumption version of it is I was a dude, and I was unhappy, and this made me happy. Which is pretty pat. And then once you realize that maybe is the fullness of how sometimes gender transition gets perceived, just substituting gal for dudes occasionally, then you understand why it is people seem to think, oh, no, I've heard that story before. Well, sure, I've met human beings. I get that we have commonalities. But I probably, at any audience I've ever talked to in my life, I would be thrilled to read any audience member's life story, well written. Everybody has something amazing in their life, and that's a big driver for me. And it's probably also a little bit behind my motivation, my transition. So who was I before? I was someone who was supposed to do great things, who was supposed, at least in the eyes of my father, to win a Nobel Prize someday. Oh, and by the way, also be a kicker in the NFL. Who was supposed to be a doctor, who was supposed to be happy, because frankly, we don't need to avoid the fact that, white, male, educated, not wealthy family, but financially well off in California, lots of advantages in life. So no one needs to shed a tear for that person that I was, except for the simple reality that that person was really deeply, fundamentally unhappy. So this is one of those rare cases where a timeline actually does a little bit of service, just because people are often curious. And because, again, everyone's experience is different. So you wouldn't have caught me at 4 years old dressing up in my sister's clothes and girl right from the start. But then again, that would have been 1975, so who knows what life would have been then anyways. And for all of his progressive leanings, my father was still a farm boy from Kansas, and there was only so much that was going to fly in the 70s, even in California. So I was this very, so untold, cheerful little kid when I was really little. Until my brother came along. And to give you a sense of time scale, that's a year. So somehow people had this idea that I was a very cheerful little kid until I was 1. Even after then, loved to tell jokes, which my son does and my daughter does as well. My favorite being the classic, knock, knock.
Who's there?
Banana.
Banana who?
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Banana.
Banana who?
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Banana.
Banana who?
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Orange.
Orange who?
Orange, you glad I didn't say banana? Which my son loves now, and my daughter also loves, but she doesn't quite get the orange part, so you better have the next couple hours free. So apparently I told a lot of jokes and was a fun little kid. Didn't have a huge number of friends. I have always been weird. We can be very upfront and honest about that. I've always been weird. I was a science fiction fantasy fan. I read nonfiction books for elementary school book reports. But even, first grade, second grade, third grade, already I was ghosting through things. So it's interesting that even way back then, that was me, because it's certainly as I get a little bit older, it becomes more and more prominent. So what I was saying is no one was under the illusion that I wasn't a smart kid. In fact, if anything, that was part of the alienation, a lot of frustration from teachers, from parents, that nothing could get me to do any work. Nothing could get me, despite being a very good athlete, I didn't want to play sports. I just was very unhappy. And that built over time. So I read a lot, fell in particularly into fantasy and science fiction books, and just spent a lot of time in my own head. By the time, and thinking, what, 4th grade, 5th grade, that's the point at which, my small group of friends, broader classmates, boys, start making sex jokes, at least in my world way back then. And with their feathered late 70s, 80s hair and OP fashion statement.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a very different town. There was not 70s and 80s hair, but
yeah.
There was buzz cuts.
Oh, God. I'd see those when I would visit family in Kansas. Like the boys' summer cut.
Exactly, yeah, no. And the boys' winter cut.
a human being as sheep to be shorn is a strange thing. But I understand after you spend some time with kids and you get a sense, it's a lot easier if we just have a slop trough. So they start to tell these sex jokes. And first, they aren't funny. And I don't mean that in a condemnation of sex jokes. There are some very funny, incredibly dirty comedians. When Louis C.K. goes really dirty, that's when I'm laughing the hardest. Even when he's making fun of people like me. For fourth graders, don't tell good jokes. But they do tell a lot of them. And I'm thinking, what the hell is wrong with them? Like, there's nothing amusing about this. Their obsession and focus on it is just crazy and forced. And that went on and on for a number of years until I finally made it to high school. I went to a private high school. I went to high school with Clint Eastwood's kids and Paul Anka's kids and whatever. Monterey, where I grew up, is certainly not the center of anybody's universe, but it has its share of celebrities. And it was the only time anyone in my family had ever gone to a private school, not for college, for any other high school, elementary, my older sister and my younger brother. This was purely like a Hail Mary, I think, by my parents to say, all right, Vivienne's got something, maybe this will bring it out of her. Of course, they didn't use those names at the time. But my father, and this is one of those small town Kansas farm boy moments, decides he needs one condition. I had to play football. And, you know, let's be very honest about it. His weird son, who was, again, pretty good athlete, still he had fears around queerness, and not that as far as I was aware I'd ever displayed anything, but I was weird, and that's good enough to raise anyone's alarm. So he decided this would be prophylactic, right? It's not the way he put it, but I know that's what in his mind is. You go to some hoity-toity school and you're weird enough as it is, and
do something traditional.
Yes, so football was like a giant, like, social condom to prevent me from picking up a
image.
Yes, a socially transmitted disease. So what I never shared with my father while he was still alive, because I'm making him sound bad, and he had flaws, believe me, but he was also a pretty great guy. But what I never shared with him when he was alive is it was literally out there on the practice field, the football team, where I realized I was playing for the wrong team. So 12 years old, fall of whatever this is, maybe 84 or something like this. And like just suddenly, oh, the other boys aren't the weird ones. They have problems.
Boys,
but those problems appear to be intrinsic to being a little boy. I'm the one that's different. And that realization was like a thunderbolt, because that was the end. I immediately 20 years later went through gender transition, and you could see so clearly, however strong of a realization it was, 20 years later is not exactly like an immediate life-changing experience. So instead, it went from I'm sort of an unhappy, disengaged little kid to being, in some sense on that day, an adult with profound insomnia, deep depression, a lot of body issues, and having nothing whatsoever to do to solve it. I certainly tried things over time, although interestingly, I never tried any of the fun things like getting deep into booze or drugs or partying or anything like that. But I intellectualized my way through a lot of different possibilities. And to be clear, it wasn't a moral judgment, like, oh, I can't do that. It was just, well, what good does it do to know this? Like, what is anyone supposed to do about this? Nothing.
There was no action that you saw out of that?
Yeah. So people want to be able to fly. Me too. There's nothing to be done about it. And so, with no options, then your only option is to instead just accept being profoundly unhappy. So then I basically standardized tested my way through high school, and then rather promptly first dropped out socially and then dropped out formally of college with a long trail of F's from classes I never even bothered to attend behind me. And then spent a good solid, when you add it all together from that first moment on, a good solid 10 years, largely in bed, doing nothing. Just totally inside my own head. Yep. It was the only place to escape to, and it was a place to, interestingly enough, and I haven't shared this very often, but it was a place to gain some degree of control. So I rarely, or certainly not directly, ever physically harmed myself, but oh my God, what you can imagine if you really put your imagination to it. And it turned out often that was enough. Very simple. You want to fall asleep and you have a terrible insomnia and deep depression, all you have to do is imagine someone beating you for 2 hours and you fall asleep. So sweet, a really nice experience. Who would think then that I would be socially disengaged? So that was that person. And that was that person until, and this is interesting because it comes back into this idea of having to reflect on things to communicate them. Being up on stage is being forced to think, well, when did you become this other person? When did that happen? Yeah. Is there anything you can take out of that, you being me, or is there anything to share for someone coming after you? And
because so many people in the world are stuck or believe that they have an obstacle that they would like to overcome that is insurmountable.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that the most beautiful, simple story in the world would be something like, one day, somehow magically, all at the same time, I decided to go back to school, was admitted, wrote a world-class research paper that was published in Nature, met, fell in love, and married my wife, and changed my gender identity. And bam, everything happened, and it was like magic. Or somewhat vaguely more plausibly, I changed my identity, and in short term, happiness and every good thing comes afterwards. But that isn't, in fact, the story. And being confronted with that and realizing, well, people want a story around this. I understand that's part of what they're often hoping to hear out of me. And to just say, I changed after things were pretty good, is not all that compelling. But in fact, in exploring that with audiences and with some writers and others, I've come to actually see that it's way, way back then, back in 1995, at the real lowest moment. So the transition for me isn't the inflection point when life went from bad to good. Mm-hmm. It was the inflection point when life went from always getting worse to marginally getting better. That was the most important, and that I can pinpoint down to the minute. And that was a night in 1995. like the loneliest year of my life, just living. I spent an entire year living in Palo Alto, partially out of a car, and basically meeting no one for the entire year. Occasionally I'd drive down to Monterey and visit my family, and that was it for a whole year. It was just, I mean, that in itself is just like profound abuse, self-abuse. So there was a moment where I very literally decided between, let's call it two philosophies, even though one is very abrupt philosophy, and that is, do I kill myself? Or do I take my father's advice? And this is advice that he never voiced, but it came from my life with him, which is live a life of substance. And in accepting that second option, know that that doesn't mean anything about your own happiness. It doesn't mean anything about the world getting better for you. All it means is that you will spend the remainder of your life doing something that really means something, that's worthwhile. So my father was always profoundly disappointing that he was a doctor. To give some sense of what he meant by a life of substance, he was a gastroenterologist who, well into the tail end of his career, in his 70s, was making house calls in modern America.
Wow.
Half of his practice was, migrant workers that everyone knew they weren't able to pay their bills. And I'm not saying this because he was a noble person in this respect. He did this because he led a life of substance. He did the things that mattered. And so I took that particular advice. And I very explicitly sort of, in a sense, committed in my mind to the idea that this isn't going to be fun. I'm not doing this to change me. It is what it is. I'm going to stay alive. And in doing so, I will commit to actually doing something of substance in the world. In some very real sense, it was another good 10 years before it turned out there was something substantially more to it than that.
Was there a specific moment in 1995? Like, you called your father to mind, or what happened?
Oh, I mean, literally, there was a night. Now, I couldn't tell you, I admit, I couldn't literally tell you the date because, believe me, it's all a blur back then. But I have pinpointed that year where I held that parking space on off San Antonio Road in Palo Alto. And it was a night that involved a gun and a choice. Very simple, very stark. Two pretty stripped down options. And the most important thing about the value to me then of exploring that, trying to communicate, if I'm a better person now than I ever was before, and I am, then when is that moment where that really changed? What can I attribute it to? If I were trying to give someone some sense of when is a moment in life when you can take control and make a change, I'm realizing it's none of the big showy ones that occurred later in my life. As profoundly meaningful as it was to meet my wife, and believe me, we can certainly put that right up there in the top 5, it's not the thing. As amazing as it was to come out to her later, to go through gender transition, to suddenly magically have incredible academic and then professional success, and all these other things that in subsequent years started coming back to me, none of them were actually sort of points of intervention. None of them were moments where the choice I made profoundly altered the direction of my life. Rather, I see all of them directly emerging out of that otherwise seemingly innocuous choice of, I'm going to live a life of substance. And while it may seem profound in retrospect, keep in mind that decision involved another 6 months of misery, and then a year working a crappy job, and then a year working an ever slightly less crappy job, and then another, and then going back to school, and then moving on to graduate school, and true to my prediction, getting nothing out of any of them. No personal happiness out of any of it. Success, yes. A sense that I was actually doing something worthwhile to the rest of the world, yes. Profound disappointment and self-disgust that it wasn't enough, that would be the defining characteristic. It did change when I met my wife. And one of my favorite talks I've ever actually given is only 3 minutes long, and it's an acceptance speech for an award I got from Equality California, which was written out. It's the only time I've ever given a talk off of a teleprompter. It was the first time I'd ever gotten a standing ovation. The whole room was full of lawyers and politicians, and the politicians were backstage after I came off. They said, "Wow, you're a rock star."
You're glowing as you describe it, so I'm so curious what this speech was.
Yes, I've actually been sticking a slide with the text into my keynote talks. I give them about 3 seconds to read a very small font, full text of that 3-minute speech. And they say, "You're probably done reading it." And then I move on to the next one. I haven't actually found the moment in which, all right, I feel like I've got enough breathing room that I can actually give a speech, like a rehearsed speech, as opposed to, all right, I'm only supposed to be up here for an hour, and I'm on hour 2 already, so let's get, we got to keep cutting and trimming as we go. So yeah, that was the real moment of transition, was that one. That was a moment where the person I was before actually did use the gun, and the person I was going to become was born. Birth took a good 10 years, most of it still pretty miserable, but really right there is where I can pin it down. And it's interesting, and what I've tried to convey to others is there's some amazing research around the often profound effect that even bringing the idea of a life of substance, and that's just my language, so working towards a cause that's bigger than you are, having a profound life goal, whatever these things are.
Being a part of a community that has a purpose. So
just bringing that, for example, to a student's awareness before the beginning of a course can actually improve their grade. But one of the interesting things about that research is it's almost always comes with a moral valuation, which is to say, it's almost always about giving those students a sense of purpose that would benefit their community, or of a religious purpose, or all these, for at least generically, we would say these sort of noble, these I don't know if you'd even call them inherently good, but communally good purposes. So I usually don't think that that's supported, I say, as a scientist. I think having the idea of a life of substance, in some sense, unfortunately, comes with no presumption that substance is inherently, whatever that substance is an inherent good to the rest of society. It's great if you can harness it that way, and I actually do believe that it is at least somewhat constructed, so you could harness it that way. But it's not the case that it has to be that way. That's one thing. And the other is one profound misunderstanding that I believe I have discovered for myself, but is also otherwise supported, is that it somehow will magically bring happiness. that there's been some promise made that if you do good, it brings smiles. And in some sense, I suppose it does. Maybe to others, it might bring fleeting smiles. It certainly didn't make me happy to be successful professionally, to be doing exactly the kind of work I wanted to be doing with my life, to get, plaudits and plaudits and all of the things that seemed like the things I was supposed to want. Still profoundly unhappy. I get a perfect score in a class and feel terrible afterwards. I would have the respect, not of my peers, but of my faculty. And I'd still think that in the moment, I think I was a failure as a scientist because, somehow in the 1 year that I'd actually been even a trainee scientist, I hadn't already won a Nobel Prize. It took a while to finally come to terms with the fact that actually I was just unhappy, and that wasn't the actual problem.
How much of that was the trained habit? I mean, you had developed such, maybe deep neurological capacity to, be unhappy, to be in that state of depression.
And I still have it. No doubt that you don't just somehow magically shed everything, even with the help of hormones. I'm a different person. At a deep and fundamental level. But boy, I'm still carrying a lot of that around with me. You don't spend 30 years learning how not to connect with people and then suddenly change overnight. But the reason I say it isn't to lament how awful it was. I actually don't even remember that well how awful it was in some sense. It really does, through a glass darkly. This is
right.
A poorly remembered past. But it's actually one of those, I think, profound and useful observations is I wonder how many people have walked away from a life of substance, a life that could truly have been amazing for them, because on day one, it didn't bring them this profound happiness that finding the thing you love was supposed to bring. Or for that matter, loving the thing you're doing. So, regardless of what direction that advice comes from, it still seems to somehow imply that you will be happy doing these things. And I don't want people to be unhappy, but who promised that doing something worthwhile would make you happy? Now, first off, I'm a scientist and a geek. It's fair to define that we've got two different kinds of happiness, broadly speaking. Eudonic happiness and hedonic happiness. And, it's really easy to engage in hedonic happiness. You can do it whenever you want to. I never did drugs or anything, so for me it was largely about, shoveling bags of Cheetos in me while reading trashy science fiction or pirating movies. Wait, they didn't pirate movies back then. But the same idea exists.
Yeah.
I saw so many movies in the 90s. Ooh, so many movies in the 90s. I probably saw every major movie. I was like a film critic, except, of course, that I never communicated with anyone. I think that's important. It's important to realize that I actually do truly believe that positive things come out of a life of substance, including happiness. But they emerge out of it. This isn't your payment on day one. In fact, it's never your direct payment. If your life of substance, it's only the direct payment if the whole point of your life is to seek happiness. But it isn't, because, at least as I know, there are very few people whose sense of substance is to be happy. I understand there are probably some monks that are somewhere around that space, but most of the people I interact with, their sense of substance is, whether we pick the trite, I'm going to cure cancer, but a perfectly good one nonetheless, or I'm going to, sew up cleft lips of kids in parts of the world that don't have access to simple cosmetic surgery, or I'm going to make the local elementary school better, or I am going to pick up trash in my neighborhood, even if it's not mine. Just whatever that sense of substance is. Or quite frankly, I'm going to make more money than anyone else does. Or I will never lose a hand of poker. Probably not achievable, but nonetheless, let's make it a life goal. Like I said, no one said that these had to be noble goals. But whatever that life of substance is, that's why you're doing it. In and of itself, that is the inherent drive, the endogenous motivator. If you did it to be happy, or rather you lived that other life to be happy, then now you have a misalignment. Your incentive is happiness, but what you're trying to do is pick up trash or win money, make money, or these other things, and guess what? You don't get either now, or you both of them poorly. So fundamentally, it's about finding that alignment. And strangely enough, the only way to get it is to realize anything that isn't my endogenous motivator, my substance, I just have to let go of. Not because I don't want it. Of course I want money. Of course I want to be happy. Of course I want people to love and have people love me back. But doing it for those things is fundamentally different than doing that thing of substance and having it bring you those as, let's just call them gifts. And it actually, when I came to this, and I came to it again, literally having these sorts of conversations with people, it struck me how strongly sad it is that so many people might have walked away from a thing that would have eventually brought happiness and success and all of the other things that they were striving after. But they've been told their whole life that it'll be profound, it'll be a lightning bolt. You'll have that moment when, well, it doesn't work that way. No one's there to tap you on the shoulder and tell you, yeah, this is it, you've made the right decision.
Right.
You construct that and you stick with it when for 5 years it's still misery. And for 5 years, it's a slow growth that seems to give very little back to you. And then you meet your wife. And then you're free to tell her one day, I wish I was a woman. And you find some internal happiness. If I'd actually worked directly towards any of those things, could we really believe any of them would have happened? It just seems profoundly unlikely that Vivienne Ming, theoretical neuroscientist and mother of two, would stand here right now, or anyone even close to that, had I tried to pursue them directly.
Let's go into maximizing human potential in the modern day, right? You have so many diverse projects. You have so many different boards that you sit on, for-profit, non-profit, consultancies, advisories, and Socos.
I think 13 at last count.
And it keeps
more than
growing.
a little frightening. Yeah, I have actually learned how to say no. It's just I say no to the wrong things. Oh, you want me to be chief scientist of, a massive scale multi-billion-dollar public company? Well, no, I'm not going to do that. You want me to be the executive team of probably the most exciting entertainment company in the world today? Sorry, I'm going to have to pass on that because I have this much better plan of how to blow my entire bank account helping people that are never going to pay me back. I do know how to say no. It's just I don't seem to deploy it at the right time. Though if anyone is looking for new public corporate board members, I'm on the market. So one thing I'm not doing right now, that would be fun. Of course, if you're hiring someone because they said it would be fun, you're probably making bad decisions anyways. But make this bad decision.
What's your ideal company then?
Oh God, my ideal company. That's actually hard to say because part of what I found doing some advising. For example, I am an advisor to the New Markets Fund at Credit Suisse. So Credit Suisse is this very famous and old Swiss bank. They seem like a perfectly nice organization. I certainly don't know the whole company. I really only know the New Markets group there. And I like what they're doing. But nonetheless, I'm not mistaking or misleading myself into thinking my work on this board is an inherent public good. I'm helping a bank make more money. I am their advisor. I'm not going to shy away from that. I am helping them make more money by reaching markets that could actually really use the recognition, like the LGBT, African American women, things like that have traditionally been ignored. But we're not going to sweeten it up beyond that. But for me, it was fascinating just to see how an organization like this runs from the inside. To see, the gears that move inside of a massive old institution. Grow up in the Bay Area, and even the big companies out here tend to be of the, free massages, possibly with happy endings, and, free lunch variety. And, seeing how the financial world works, particularly given that the financial world is, if we use the world economy and the brain as our metaphor here, the financial world is this little nucleus that turns out makes a brain work really, really well when that nucleus is kind of small and functioning efficiently. And as soon as it gets a little bit too big, a few too many cells dedicated to whatever its vague and innocuous liquidity purpose is, suddenly epilepsy. It's just strokes and seizures everywhere. And, suffices to say, in the modern world economic brain, it isn't this tiny little nucleus. So being on that board and being able to see how even a small segment of this large organization operates is actually really fascinating. Getting to see that a bit with General Electric and seeing how, what is approaching a 500,000 person organization that works literally all over the world and nearly every part of everyone's life. How do they operate? It's fascinating. So again, it's kind of like a conversation. I'm happy to offer whatever it is I have to offer to them if in exchange I just get to be a little cultural anthropologist and see what is going on here.
That curiosity that you have, that willingness to, take a meeting with an undergrad who just happened to have heard you speak and is enamored of your personality and your work, right? All the way to Credit Suisse and GE. The the delight is really what I see of this is a person or this is a system that I get to explore for myself because for yourself because you're curious.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone recently made an introduction of someone else to me because that other person thought I could help them answer a question. And before they formally introduced us, they said, I know you're really busy, but, if you've got time, she really wanted to meet you. And I said, listen, my one professional indulgence is meeting people. Like, unless they're trying to sell me something, much to my staff's frustration, I'm always happy to give an hour up to a great conversation. Even if the person's not a great conversationalist. Because there's always something there. That's what people often also, they kind of miss in conversations is you gotta pull it out of them. To forget social conversations, a job interview. It shouldn't be like they're being interrogated by the police. It should be not only, I'm going to ask you to wow me, but guess what? I'm going to help you wow me. Like, I am going to dig through you right here together. We're going to dig through everything you've done and find that thing that I think, wow, I know you didn't know it, but that is the thing that's going to get me to hire you. Because what you really want to know about people is not, in some world like they're lost in Mad Max world and, can they fend for themselves? And I suppose if that's the job you're hiring for, but Christ, I do not want to be in that industry. No, what I want to know is what could they do? If I could give them everything I could, what could they do? Of course, that's a bit idealized. Clearly, even the best manager can't be there all the time, but that's what I really want to know.
Is that empowering people?
Yeah.
And what is that hook that can get someone to grow into their fullest self?
Absolutely. So in this case, what did I have? I had a definition of a scientist I enjoyed. Can I remember what it was? A scientist is someone who has a pathological predilection for secrets. It also happens to be a set of methodologies for knowing that your secrets are as external to you as possible. Like, I can just make up secrets. If someone without the methodology could just be a writer. No one said the secrets have to be out there in the real world. If that's what you want to know, though, then you're a scientist. All of the other stuff,
how to write a hypothesis section.
The methodology, all of that is in support of this core thing, which is, I want to know something before anyone else in the world is. And then if I want to be a good scientist, I then need to be excited about communicating it. And that's it. Those are the two core ingredients. The rest of it is just the tools and tricks of the trade for doing it well. Doing it in such a way that once I communicate it, someone else doesn't immediately raise their hand and say, here's why you're an idiot. Which is a much more common experience in the world of science than you might imagine. In fact, you can just tell the person when you walk into a room for a science conference, you can see the people that are just waiting to catch everyone else. It's like the world of trolls, except right there in person.
Conferences.
Yeah. Physicists in particular just seem to love that sort of thing. We'll save aside whatever personality observation that happens to be. But that's at its heart. And what I found is, yes, secrets of the brain, amazing. I love to be deep in there. Secrets about human potential, wow, turns out that's just as fascinating to me. Secrets about the entire complex system that is humanity and how you get human potential out of that. That turns out to be just as fascinating. And then here's the curious thing for someone who spent so many years not connecting with people and not socially engaging. The secret of one actual person's life as they communicate it to you over tea. It's just as fascinating. Probably not as much of a business to that, but just as fascinating.
If you were to teach that skill of curiosity, of digging into secrets, whether that's in a single person or an organization or humanity as a system, how would you start someone on the path towards developing curiosity?
So the starting point is in fact very general. So this is going to sound like it's out of one of my talks, and that's of course because it is, and it's going to be this TED Talk. The starting point is to buck the incentives, or insert another consonant there if you want. It's the same philosophy. I'll let your audience fill in what I meant by that. So if you care about pleasing someone else, if you're in a conversation, that should be an actual pleasing experience. But I mean something a little more than that. If your focus is how you appear to someone else, avoiding punishment, seeking praise, all those sorts of things, then you never really have the opportunity to connect, right? That becomes the screen that comes down across everything you do. There's no real opportunity for self-expression as if it's always getting recast through what everyone else thinks. No one's perfectly insensitive. If you, in fact, better to say, if you are, that is a serious institutionalizable disorder. But if you can be at a far end of that spectrum, way out in the, no, I understand how you want me to be, but it turns out that's actually going to make things worse in the long run. In the moment, it'd be better because that person over there in the corner is going to stop frowning at me for being who I am, and that person over there is going to stop being upset because the things they asked me to do, I always return different than they were given to me. But over time, they're going to realize I've been giving them actually something better back. And if they don't agree with me, someone else will. Because what I care about is what I'm building, what I'm doing.
It goes back to the purpose.
And it goes back, again, to this idea of following your motivator, your endogenous motivator, the one that comes from inside you, as opposed to exogenous, if you want to get 2 words in your 2-word-a-day calendar. And it's hard and it's profound, right? The getting up in front of 5,000 people ought to be terrifying if what you care about predominantly is, oh my God, how are they going to perceive me? Am I going to say something wrong? Am I going to misspeak? Am I going to remember everything I'm supposed to say? There are things I am supposed to do, and I have to do them.
My job is to please those 5,000 people, and I can't control them.
In some way, yes. Or other people more broadly, or am I ever going to get another invitation to speak again? And oh my God, does this dress look awful? And the whole thing. When instead, for me, I simply approach it as it's a conversation. There's me with my cup of tea, and there's you with your cup of tea, and hopefully we have found the most character-infused coffee shop in all of whatever city I happen to be in, and the fact that the other side of the table might have one high school student, or an aspiring entrepreneur, or a venture capitalist, or a politician, or 10 people, or 500 people, or thousands of people, doesn't really change. Changes how much I project, change how many coffees you need to order, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a conversation, and it's a conversation that's meant to discover some secrets. Usually the secrets are subtext, because I wouldn't get my secrets if I was transparent that that's what I was trying to do.
Hi, my name's Vivienne. I'm here to figure out what makes you tick.
Yes.
That's not why people come to you for coffee invitations.
I'm not that kind of psychiatrist. I'm not a psychiatrist at all, thank God. My sister-in-law is one. She's wonderful, I'm sure. But it is, I'm not that kind of psychologist, nor am I that kind of doctor or any of that sort of thing. No. This is because the secrets have their own value. Right? I'm not saying there's anything noble about it. I think I do some pretty good things with the secrets, but they don't have to be, right? There's this great story that one of my undergraduate, second time around professors used to tell, a guy named Marty Serino, and it was a story about this trained raccoon. They were training it for a commercial, and what it was supposed to do was for like a bank, a local bank or something, and they were training it to reach up and put a quarter into a piggy bank. And, if they did it, they'd give the raccoon a treat. And the raccoon, it has prehensile but still not super big hands, so it would pick the quarters up with it. And kind of walk over to the piggy bank at first, but it wouldn't put it in. The handler would work with the raccoon. Eventually it might put it in, give it a treat, put it in, give it a treat. Good, I think we got it. Get those cameras rolling. And that first time, the cameras are rolling and the raccoon picks up the quarter and dips it into the piggy bank and then pulls it back out. And rubs its hands together and dips it in and pulls it back out. And since then, way back then, I never heard of such research. Since a friend of mine named Nathaniel Daw and others have done a lot of research on reinforcement learning in the basal ganglia dopaminergic system of rats in particular, and saying, wow, you know what? If you way overtrain an animal, it will actually, the action itself becomes its own reward.
Yeah.
And which is actually an interesting and profound thing to note about humans as well. But, you know, that raccoon eventually just dipping the quarter in was its own reward. It didn't need the treats anymore, and it didn't actually care about the quarter. It was the action of it gave the raccoon little thrills. Presumably, for the wonks that might be listening, there's probably some extinction that eventually happened with that particular behavior. But it turns out you really can overtrain things and get them to become largely permanent behaviors. So, secrets are my quarters. You know, like I dip them in my tea and I munch on them throughout the day. I noodle through them and think about them. The other thing that I like to then do with them is to go back. They become another currency where I can go back and do my other big passion, which is then share with people. Which is then wonderful because it becomes this self-sustaining cycle of mining for secrets and sharing. And no, of course, I don't mean that I'm outing people to their coworkers or something like that. I mean, secrets are much more abstracted than that for me. It's about why, people's motivators, who they are, the whys of the world. The specifics, I am still more than enough as a social misfit to not actually care about. I can barely remember people's names, much less any given person's secret. But to have made an interesting observation about someone and to take it away as, I wonder about this, and to then be able to use it as a point of connection with someone else is truly amazing and fascinating.
Let's go into Socos and specifically Kindersight. What is the next big project that you are spearheading?
I don't think we're working on anything right now. I'd have to...
You're too busy with the coffee dates and the secrets.
Yes. So, for a while now, I have been talking with great enthusiasm about a research project that Socos is undertaken with a group at UT Austin, where we're sort of supplying technology and they've been supplying us some data. And it was sort of a neat and incredibly serendipitous project to come off the ground because my wife and I were giving a keynote at South by Southwest at the education portion of the conference. And it was an interesting invitation because I will say, I think in genuine honesty, that our work is fairly unique in the field. Certainly in terms of work that is applied and actually turned into things that people could buy, it's very unique in the field. And so we got asked to do this keynote, and really largely just before we're about to do it, you know, in the days and somewhat running up to it, they say, so don't talk about what you do. I'm like, wait a minute. We do something that's different than anyone else. In fact, that's one of the main reasons you're asking us to talk, but you only want us to address it in broad philosophical strokes. So I've never actually gone back and watched the video of that talk, but I know up on stage, I was feeling a little panicky, just because I would frequently find myself wanting to sort of dive into some specifics of what we'd done, be it research or applied work, and express why this abstract idea I was talking about was actually meaningful and changing a kid's life. But we couldn't. And so I got a little panicky, and I thought, well, what about this? I've had this idea bouncing around in my head for a little bit. So why don't I just throw a concrete idea out, like pitch an idea right out here on stage in front of 5,000 people. And I said, imagine if we could put microphones into classrooms with kids, kindergartners, and listen to everything that they were saying to each other and everything that was being said back to them. And straight from those conversations, we could directly tell their teachers what was going on inside that kid's head. Like in the moment, the teacher could go and directly intervene with that child as though they were a personal tutor just for them. Like turn master teachers into near godlike figures, but take your average teacher, make him a master teacher, take a struggling teacher, get him in charge. So this is the idea, roughly, that I pitched on stage. And by the time we got off stage and I got back to my email, there was this email from a professor at UT Austin saying, I can do this, I want to do this, and I want to get started today. And by the time we'd left Austin that week, because being very old school South by Southwesters, we of course brought our family with us. We had this project in place, which I did just automatically started calling Kindersight. But over time, it evolved as our company, Socos, has evolved away from, does this child understand this material? What grade are they going to get? To something, in fact, vastly more profound and so much better aligned with our goal about maximizing human potential. So what if we put microphones in classrooms and recorded everything those little kids were saying to each other, and everything that was being said back to them by adults and by other kids. And from that, we actually predicted their life outcomes. And I am talking about, how long is this 5-year-old going to live? How much money will they make? How far will they go in their education? How happy will they be? How much of an impact will they have on their community?
The most important questions for life for an individual.
I think actually the fundamental questions about education. Everything else is just mediating factors, if you will.
And heuristics to sort of take guesses at that long term. We
presume that if you know how to do a specific thing, like read or write, it will advance these other goals and the societal benefit. But remember, we're including community impact as one of our prediction dimensions. We think if you're able to do mathematics, it will somehow make your life better as well as that of your community. We want to enculturate you. We want you to learn social rules. We want you to do a variety of things, all on the presumption that it will make society collectively better at the same time that it makes your life collectively better. Mm-hmm. Collectively better? Takes us back to our discussion about what happens, how much of your, by mass, how much of your dry weight is human. There was a great Saturday morning breakfast serial about that, where the kid is having a discussion, I think, with his mother about, when I die, do all things go to heaven when they die? And the mother sort of dismissively says, yeah, sure. He says, wait a minute. There's a problem there. Because the world is broken up into two classes of beings. You have, and refers to some detail, moderately
I'll see if I can find the comic.
Evolution theory. But the great thing is, if you're including the mammals together with the broadcast spawners who are producing millions of progeny, and we're producing a couple in a lifetime, and then we all go to heaven and then we all live forever, then what you're just saying is that basically in heaven we will all be basically disgustingly packed full of parasites. And then the mother backtracks and tries to work through it. Maybe it's only, and it's all misery and terribleness in the end, because the two don't tend to go together very well. Okay, so parasites. Inevitable. All of my conversations seem to end in discussions of bodily parasites.
Given that you have 2 young children, that's not very much of a surprise.
I suppose. They're still in the parasite collecting phase of their existence. But so I fundamentally believe this is what education is ultimately about. And the only reason we don't do it is because, quite frankly, we can't. Because we're talking about roughly 20 years of someone's life. I don't know where they're going. I mean, realistically, you just can't. So we make best guesses. If we do these things at these various times, and then, we've developed whole schools of thought and conflicts, and in some cases those conflicts become very realized conflicts. But it's possible. There's an enormous body of literature that shows actually you can make some fairly solid inferences about where a child's life is headed, often from some very depressing piece of information, like what was their zip code? How stressful is their household? How many things can they remember? Can they resist eating that marshmallow? All of these things, classic and new alike. And people have literally tracked these children into adulthood and into all the way out to the ends of their life and seen, wow, here are strong predictors, here are others. There is a real science to the life insurance business. Well, if this is our goal, we want people to live happy, healthy, productive lives, to, I think, take the Gate Foundation tagline, which I actually think is a pretty wonderful one, then let's explicitly do that. And guess what? We can. And not in some exhaustive way. In fact, even better, do it naturalistically, which is a very wonky word to say. All of those things that your kids do naturally, when they draw pictures and they talk to you and they ask questions and they just live their lives, that is actually the richness, not the tests that they fill out. It's not the Scantrons and the online surveys. What if you took all of those natural expressions of a person and turned them into life outcome predictions? Okay, unfortunately, that's a cursed crystal ball. It's a horror story, but it's true. It's like the most profoundly unfair thing of all times. Hey, guess what, Mom? Your child is heading for a Nobel Prize. By telling you that, I just made it less likely to be true.
Or even the reverse of that.
Well, that's the thing. If the reverse of that, if I say, guess what, Mom? Your child's headed to drop out of 5th grade, less likely to be true. Oh, I'd take that. And many more kids are likely to drop out than to get Nobel Prizes. We're just going to tell everybody they're going to drop out at 5th grade. And no, Mom, your child's currently likely to drop out at 5th grade. I just made it more likely to be true.
Right.
That's why it's this cursed. It's like the old thermos joke. How does it know? How does it know if it keeps hot things hot and cold things hot? How does it know? So it's this cursed crystal ball. So with this amazing technology, snap some pictures of your kids' artwork. Grab 30 seconds of their enthusiastically asking you questions about why is the sky blue and why were you and Mommy in bed, whatever the questions they may have. And we can make these amazing predictions, and then we can't do anything with them. We can't share them. Well, what can we do? What are possible? Well, what if we could identify from that every single day one single thing? That one thing that will have the biggest impact on your child's life. We've just made a prediction. We have decades and decades of research on what both forms those predictions, but also about what changes then reverberate across a person's lifetime and change the trajectory of their life. can't we just use our life outcome predictions to say, parents, here is the one thing you can do tonight that will have the biggest impact on your child's life, and deliver that every single night. Knowing how to add is profoundly valuable. Knowing a language, knowing 2 languages, knowing how to write, knowing how to do Euler's method, or how to, for that matter, find oil via sonographic assessment. These are all amazing skills that people should live throughout their life, learn throughout their life. But apart from some of that early language and math learning, most of them are just a set of tools.
Right.
It's not about the craftsman. Our education system needs to be about building better craftsmen, not about supplying better tools. I mean, the latter comes.
Right. Tools can
If
be
you
learned.
have an amazing craftsman, they can go build their own tools. I mean, really, genuinely. We shouldn't abdicate the responsibility of providing something there, but they can do it. I think of my own life, which we have just belabored here for quite some time, and think most of the really amazing things I do today with math, with computer science, with entrepreneurship and business and speaking, and those are broad strokes, every one of which has deep specific skills that I could throw on a resume. None of them I learned in school. I mean, graduate school, maybe, but let's set that aside. They are things, even graduate school is a good example, because that's learning essentially on the job. As my advisor at one point put it, you're no longer part of the problem, now you're part of the solution. And so, yeah, they have foundations and things I learned, but actually what I'm getting at is, once I made that change in me, and also acknowledging that there was an amazing foundation left by my parents and my family that had never abandoned me through all those hard years, you recognize, wow, that was what was actually necessary to restart a life that had completely spent itself. To restart a life effectively at 30 years of age, start completely over again. And now I realize, hell, you should just set a clock and start over again every 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, whatever it is. If you've hit double digits doing the same life, then you have taken it too far.
I think it's Kevin Kelly who said, start a new project every 5 years, right? And be done with that project at the end of 5 years. And I like this step of taking that further and saying, no, restart your life every 5 years.
Yeah. And in a sense, if you really are taking me seriously and you can find that means of ignoring the incentives that others have set for you and following your own internal incentives, your endogenous motivation, then walking away from a life is actually pretty easy. I've now, both in the most profound sense at a couple of times, but even outside of them, I have walked away from great jobs at their height. I have walked away from academia. I actually expect sometime soon I might be walking away from entrepreneurship. I love it. It's not because academia and entrepreneurship and all the other things I've done haven't been amazing. It's because now I need something new. I think I can actually serve my purpose. I can live a life of substance even better if I actually strive to do something different.
And modeling that too for others to see.
Yes. So we've gone deeply philosophical into here, but this is what Socos is building. So imagine a parent in Kinshasa.
Where is Kinshasa?
Kinshasa is in Africa.
Got it.
And this parent has old Nokia candy bar style phone. I think somebody just released a new flip phone. It does run Android, but People still release these things. And in many places, particularly some parts of Africa, they have amazingly robust mobile systems, but nothing else. Mm-hmm. So this is it, right? This is how you engage with this world. And I know we have a tendency, here I'm looking beautifully at UC Berkeley's campus in a deeply connected part of the world. But this idea that everybody has a computer and everybody has a smartphone and everyone has high-speed broadband, and that educational technology means that we should be surgically attaching products to people's hands is, I'm scornful of it, and I'm someone that's actually interested in surgically attaching technology to people's brains. So that mom with her candy bar phone in Kinshasa can snap a photo of a drawing that her son did and send it, text it to, her sister and CC Kindersight. She occasionally is going to get a question. Something like, actually, how many questions did Maria ask you today? Or is Maria spending more than an hour outside today? Once a day, she answers a question like that and snaps a photo and otherwise leads her life. And every single day, we send a new targeted personal recommendation. Hey, Mom, this is what Maria needs today. Hey, Mom, this is what Jonathan needs today. This is what Xinghan needs today. This is what Mario needs today. And seeing that you can actually change people's lives with nothing more than a text message. And I don't mean either change it today. That's not our goal, but neither can you just fundamentally make a 5-year-old into a 30-year-old. Neither do I mean, though, change in some abstract sense. No, I mean literally make them live longer. Produce someone that will, I've never ever put it this way. Every text becomes a nudge. Every nudge becomes a subtle change. Accumulated over 20 years, those subtle changes turn into the person that child could have been, but never would have been. The person we always wanted to be. For ourselves, now at this point in my life, for my children. Every nudge. Here's a nudge that will increase their working memory span. Not magically. It's a nudge that actually decreases stress in the household because high household stress is a causal factor in decreased working memory. Here's a nudge that increases the nutritional balance of the child's diet. Again, having profound general cognitive impact. Here's a nudge about language development. Here is a nudge specifically because we know your kid has diabetes. Here's a nudge that has been shown to be prophylactic against early onset Alzheimer's. Wait a minute, that's 50 years from now, maybe 40 years from now. Believe it or not, there's research that applies there too.
And those things start now.
And they start now. It's in a sense, it's like the classic, and much to my own personal misery someday, I'm sure, a lot of the damage you do to your skin from UV radiation happens when you're young. You can certainly make life better by covering up later, but pretty much I'm on my way to the dermatologist. I just haven't scheduled the appointment yet.
Sure.
So yeah, even though you're not talking about the effects right there and then, proximally as we'd say, they are very real and they are not subtle. Mm-hmm. This is, we're literally talking about changing people's lifespans by years, some cases decades. We're talking about incarceration rates. We're talking about 25% increases in lifetime earnings, in best strategies for mitigating the bias effects of local cultures. These are incredibly profound things when you think about the realities of the world that we live in. To just have that one piece of reliable advice coming in, not off the radio, speaking to some idealized family. It's advice directly to you that's specifically to help your child or your children. And if I haven't yet conveyed how excited I am about Kindersight and about our ability to release it both as an app and philanthropically, possibly as a text-based system that's available to everyone and anyone, then clearly I need to go back to affect school and practice my passionate voice, because there's nothing I've ever done in my life, and I will say in wild arrogance that I have done some pretty cool things. There's nothing in my life that compares with this. Oh yeah, I did have some kids, but this is big.
So where can people go, where can the audience listening go to learn more about Kindersight, about Socos, and to follow you?
So there are innumerable places one can get led by Google, but if you want to go straight to the source, then check out socoslearning.com. So Socos is SOCOS, learning.com. Our project, which we are testing our pilot project via Kickstarter, you can find the best spot for that is go sign up for it at Kindersight, and that's sight as in vision, kindersight.socoslearning.com. And that will also then pass you directly on to all of the incredible materials and promotional nonsense and marketing EBGBs that we have put together to hack the brains of viewers at Kickstarter.
Wonderful. Well, Vivienne, such a pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing so much and so vulnerably and so potently that people can use.
It's been fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Robin Zander Show. To join the newsletter and download free a copy of Robin's book, The Accelerated Learner, visit robinzander.co. We look forward to you joining us next time for more from Robin and his extraordinary guests.